What's up, guys? My name's Brandon and welcome back to Apple Weekly. In this episode, we're going to discuss what's going on with iOS 18 right now. We're going to talk about Apple's major rebrand with iOS 26, how each of the next 3 iPhones might have a redesign, another product delay, a crazy AirTag story, and more. And if you guys want to get all of this Apple news delivered straight to your inbox every Friday, I do have a newsletter called the Apple Den, which you can check out by the link in the description below. Okay, so before we get into the crazy news, let's start with where we're at right now, because right now we are just over a week away from WWDC 2025, where we're going to see iOS 26 and all the other operating systems. Now, if you're confused by iOS 26, just stay tuned. We'll talk about that in case you missed my video. But this week was relatively boring. All eyes were basically on this iOS 26 rebrand and a lot of rumors. We did not see any new software released this week for iOS 18. So as of right now, iOS 18.5 is still the latest public software version for the iPhone. We did not see an 18.5.1, although that could be coming at some point in the near future before WWDC, because we have been hearing about quite a few bugs, especially some related to MagSafe charging. So there have been some reports this week about MagSafe charging being broken basically on iOS 18.5. It's giving a lot of people issues, and there are a few other bugs as well. So it seems like we should be getting an 18.5.1 within the next couple of weeks. But as far as iOS 18.6 beta 1, which is not going to be a very large update, but nonetheless we were anticipating that, that's looking more and more likely like it's going to come after WWDC and iOS 26 at this point. So I would not get your hopes up for that until after WWDC. Now, as for the overall performance and battery life on iOS 18.5, like I mentioned, we have been seeing some reports of some issues in terms of bugs and stability issues with iOS 18.5, mainly related to MagSafe charging. Now, me personally, I charge my phone every single night and also throughout the day with MagSafe, and I've had no issues on iOS 18.5. However, some people are having issues with that. But aside from those issues, I'm not really seeing anything or really hearing any reports of major issues with 18.5. So all is good there. Really nothing to talk about. I don't want to repeat myself from what I've talked about in the past. But let's move on, because like I said, we are just over a week away from seeing iOS 26 at WWDC. Now, let me just say this right now. If you missed my video on iOS 26, the big rebrand that Apple is doing, check that out. It's up in the cards and down in the description below. I go a lot more in detail with that. But if you missed it, basically this week, Mark Gurman announced that Apple is going to have a major software rebrand where they're basically going to ditch the numbering system like iOS 15, 16, 17, 18, and they're going to replace it with the year. So it's going to be iOS 26, watchOS 26, tvOS 26, basically meaning the year 2026, since the software will be predominantly used in 2026, not 2025, since of course it does release in September. Like I've said before, the best way to think about it is with a car. If you buy a car at the end of 2025, it's most likely going to be a 2026 model if it's like a new car from the factory. And this is a pretty big deal because this is the first time Apple has rebranded their software in 15 years, since iOS 4, when it went from iPhone OS 3 to iOS 4. That was a big change. We saw a lot of big changes to iOS 4 at that time as well, which makes me really believe that we are going to see that redesign here with iOS 26. It just makes sense. I mean, it just lines up perfectly. Apple could have done this a while back, but they were probably waiting for that redesign before they switch over to this, year numbering scheme. Now, speaking of iOS 26, we're also hearing from Mark Gurman that the design changes that were rumored to come on iOS are also going to extend to the Apple TV and the Apple Watch. So Gurman says this in his reports: "When I broke the news earlier this year about the new look, I noted it would come to iOS, macOS, and iPadOS. But it will actually go further and touch all of Apple's operating systems. That means tvOS and watchOS will both be redesigned to match their more popular siblings, while visionOS will get some adjustments in cases where the changes make sense for a headset. While iOS 7 in 2013 was the biggest ever visual change for the iPhone software, the latest overhaul will be much more widely felt." So Gurman is not saying that it's going to be like a bigger redesign necessarily than iOS 7. It's just going to be more widely felt, since all the operating systems are now going to kind of feel the same. It's going to be more cohesive across the board, which I am a massive fan of, because like I said in my video earlier this week, It's so spread out right now, like not even just the numbering systems like iOS 18, watchOS 10, or watchOS 11, I can't even keep track of it. macOS, whatever macOS, 15. You see what I'm saying? Like you forget the numbers. And besides you guys who watch these videos, your average consumer has no idea what the latest of any of these are. So to have everything streamlined and just be 26, it just makes sense. And it also makes you feel like you're on like the newest. It's like when you have a car, when you have a 2026 car in 2025 and also in 2026, it feels like new and you just feel like you're on the latest. It's a psychological thing, but I just think it makes a lot of sense for Apple to transition over to this. And I like how the design changes are going to be across the board now for every operating system. But that's not the only thing we heard about iOS 26. We also heard that it's going to make transferring an eSIM from an iPhone to an Android easier. So that's a nice little adjustment, but a more important one, and one that I think is going to kind of surprise some people, is that we're also hearing that Apple is planning a standalone gaming app for iOS 26. And that's because Apple just recently acquired a gaming studio called RAC7 or RAC7. And if you're not familiar with RAC7, like I was not familiar with it, it's actually just a two-person video game development company that's behind the Apple Arcade game called Sneaky Sasquatch. So it's not necessarily a major acquisition, but it's still like the first time Apple has acquired a game studio. So it seems like Apple is continuing to take gaming seriously, and especially moving forward, we might see that show up in iOS 26 or even later. Also, there's a new job posting by Apple that basically confirms that a revamp for the calendar application is coming with iOS 26. And you can see that the job posting is looking for a senior software engineer for calendar experience. And this was actually listed on April 29th. And it says that Apple is looking for candidates to join a team that will reimagine what a modern calendar can be across Apple's platforms. So reimagining what the calendar application can be kind of, gives us some insight into Apple's plans to revamp the calendar application either in iOS 26 or for the next version of iOS, but I would assume it's coming with 26. Also this week, we finally got the WhatsApp application on the iPad. So if you're an iPad user and you do use WhatsApp to communicate, that has now received a fully native iPadOS application. Finally, we also saw an update this week to the Apple Invites application, which I am a big fan of. I actually have used it in real life a couple of times, and I can see myself using it a lot in the future, but there was an update this week, version 1.2. So add a link tile to link your guest to a gift registry, potluck list, trip planner, and more right within the event. So you now have a link tile to link your guests to it. And if you go into the Invites application and you go to create an invite and go down to the bottom where it shows tiles, you can add a link right there that will be displayed to all guests. You can add it right there, or of course this link section right here, you can do that. And if you're a Tesla user, we just saw a new update for the Tesla application this week that takes advantage of the dynamic island and live activities when you're supercharging. So now when you're supercharging away from home, you'll see a live activity up in your dynamic island. And also in your live activities here, you will see the amount of time it takes to finish supercharging and other details there as well. Very cool. But not everything is good news in the world of Apple right now, because we're also hearing that the HomePad, the Apple, smart home device that we've been hearing about for quite some time now, the one that's going to eventually have the robotic arm on it, not this first version, but eventually it will have that. We're now hearing that that might be delayed again. So according to Mark Gurman, he says that this smart home hub has been delayed due to problems with Siri. He says, I expect the Home Hub to finally hit the market by the end of this year at the earliest. It remains up in the air, with the robotic version following a year or two later. To get the lower end version ready faster, I'm told that Apple has pulled some bolder features from the device that could reappear in subsequent models. So this first generation of Smart Home Hub might be more bare bones. It might be missing a lot of features because of Apple kind of running behind with this project. And obviously Apple Intelligence being mediocre is not helping their case, because it seems like the issues are mostly stemming from Siri. Now let's move on to this year's iPhone, which might be called iPhone 17, it might be called iPhone 2026, it might be called iPhone A19 and A19 Pro, we really don't know what the name of the next iPhone is going to be. And I think that might be the first time I've ever said that here on the channel, where we do not know what the name of the next iPhone is going to be, because we've had a pretty consistent run up of versioning, except for the iPhone 10, of course, where Apple skipped 9 and went from iPhone 8 to iPhone 10. This could be a scenario where we might have a change with the naming of the iPhones, because we are getting that revamp with the software. But regardless, I'm just going to call it iPhone 17 for now, because we don't really know what it's going to be called. But anyways, we're now hearing that the base iPhone 17 is expected to have the same A18 chip as the iPhone 16. And this is according to Apple analyst Jeff Poo, and he's saying that the iPhone 17 Air, so the slim iPhone, is expected to have the A19 chip, while the iPhone 17 Pro models, the Pro and Pro Max, are expected to have the A19 Pro chip. And both of those chips, by the way, the A19 chips, are expected to be manufactured with TSMC's third generation 3nm process, which is known as N3P. So that's one way to get people to upgrade to the Air this year, because if we learned anything from Samsung's S25 Edge, it's that it was priced very high and there wasn't a lot of advantage with that phone aside from the slimness and of course the lightweight. But if Apple adds a faster chip, not really sure that matters for the people who are going to be looking to buy these devices. Really, nobody cares about the chipset except for the pros anyway, the people buying the Pro models. But regardless, we might see some additional upgrades for the 17 Air come later this year. Now, of course, the iPhone 17 Air and the iPhone 17 Pros are going to get a redesigned camera bump. We might even see a slight redesign to the base 17 as well, but definitely for the 17 Air and the 17 Pros, we're seeing a new kind of revamped look on the back of the iPhone. So that's going to be pretty significant, but that's not going to be the only design change over the next 3 years, because we're now hearing in a new report from Digital Chat Station that we're going to see a redesign for every iPhone for the next 3 years. So here's what they posted over on Weibo. So they said Apple is planning a series of design changes for different parts of the iPhone for 2025, 2026, and 2027. So for 2025, this year, we're going to have a great change on the back, so a horizontal large matrix lens deco. And then next year for 2026, we're going to have a major design in the front. So he's saying it's going to have a whole screen, so basically Face ID under the screen. It's going to be kind of like the hole punch that we see on the S25 Ultra and the S25 Edge as well. And then for 2027, this is expected to be a comprehensive change where it's going to have a full screen design. So the iPhone might have under screen Face ID and under screen front camera. So it might be all glass, no cutouts, no hole punch, nothing. It's going to be all glass in 2027. And that would be quite amazing. Now, of course, in 2027, maybe even before 2027, we could be seeing the iPhone Fold. So that's going to be another design change thrown in the mix. And we're hearing that this iPhone Fold is not going to have the crease down the middle, which would be a massive win. And really, we haven't seen that from anybody else just yet. I've used most of the foldables and they all have that annoying crease. So I cannot wait to see what Apple does with that. But it seems like we're going to have a lot of design changes coming to the iPhone over the next 3 or so years, which I am personally very excited for, because the iPhone has been getting quite stale lately. And then finally, just as tradition, we have another crazy AirTag story. So this time, a man in Florida showed up uninvited to a hotel room where his estranged wife was staying with another man. According to police, he was aggressive right from the start, demanding that she come downstairs and yelling that she was cheating on him. Now, she eventually did come down along with the man she was now seeing, and that's when things turned violent, because the husband broke the rear window of his wife's Toyota RAV4, and when the wife and the other man came downstairs, he punched the other guy and cut his arm. Now, the other man was found with a laceration on his wrist, and a knife was found in the husband's truck. So of course, after the husband was arrested, the wife was talking to police and was confused how he knew that they were staying at that hotel. And turns out the wife found an AirTag under the passenger seat in her Toyota RAV4. So once she scanned it, she found out that it was registered to her husband's phone number. So of course, he was booked into jail and he was charged with aggravated battery, criminal mischief, and installing a tracking device without consent, and got a bond set at $76.50. Just another day away in Florida. But yeah, crazy stuff. AirTags are being used out here to catch people cheating. And if it were not for the AirTag, and if it were not for the Find My application showing, the last digits of the phone number, she would not have known that it was her husband. Although you can kind of put two and two together, but you see what I mean. The AirTag was the real MVP here, or maybe not, because for him, it landed him in jail. But anyways, that is the crazy AirTag story for this week. I have another crazy one coming next week, but that is also Apple Weekly for this week. So we are, again, just one Apple Weekly away from seeing WWDC and iOS 26. I am pumped for that. If you guys are as well, make sure you are subscribed to the channel. I will have a ton of iOS 26 content and all macOS and all that stuff coming to the channel as well. You do not want to miss it. But anyways, guys, I will see you very soon. Take care.